Chapter 1. The Outcast. The mining colony of Vares 7 was a world of perpetual twilight. The twin suns of its distant star system barely illuminated the barren moon surface, casting long shadows over a desolate, ash-gray landscape. The air shimmered with fine particles of dust from constant mining operations, while towering refineries emitted plumes of smoke that swirled into the hazy atmosphere. The settlers lived in modular, prefabricated habitats clustered around the mines, their existence defined by hard labor and survival. Vares 7 was a place where people came to disappear. It was home to exiled criminals, displaced refugees, and those who had nowhere else to go. Among the outcast was Lyra, a young woman of the alien Kyrene race. The Kyrene were a proud, warrior-like species, their bodies built for speed and agility. They valued strength above all else, and their society left no room for weakness. But Lyra was different. Once a skilled scout for her people, her life had changed forever after a catastrophic accident during a mission on a foreign planet. A collapsed building had crushed her lower spine, leaving her legs paralyzed. In the eyes of her people, she was no longer a warrior. She was no longer Kyrene. She had been cast out, abandoned on Vares 7 with nothing but the clothes on her back. A lonely existence. Lyra lived alone in a small, dilapidated habitat on the outskirts of the colony. The modular unit had once been part of a larger mining facility, but years of neglect had left it in disrepair. The walls were cracked, the power systems unreliable, and the air recyclers wheezed like an old man on his last legs. It wasn't much, but it was home. Her days were spent scavenging for scrap metal and broken machinery she could repair and sell. Her hands, once skilled in wielding weapons, now worked with delicate precision as she fixed power cells and reprogrammed mining drones. Despite her physical limitations, Lyra had found ways to adapt. She had built a crude, self-powered chair that allowed her to navigate the uneven terrain outside her habitat, and her sharp mind had earned her a reputation as a reliable tinkerer. But the colony was not kind to the weak or disabled. The other settlers viewed Lyra with a mixture of pity and disdain. She was a reminder of what they feared most: vulnerability. In a place where strength and self-reliance were everything, Lyra was an outcast. Her only companion was her drone, Spanner, a small, spider-like machine she had salvaged and rebuilt from scrap. Spanner followed her everywhere, its metal legs clicking softly as it skittered across the ground. It had no voice, but its expressive movements and blinking lights conveyed a surprising amount of personality. Lyra often spoke to Spanner as if it were alive, finding comfort in its silent companionship. The stranger. One morning, as Lyra worked on a broken mining drill outside her habitat, a shadow fell over her. She looked up, squinting against the dim light of the overcast sky. A man stood before her, his face partially obscured by a respirator and goggles. His clothing was patched and worn, but the rifle slung across his back and the confident way he carried himself marked him as a mercenary. "Need something?" Lyra asked, her voice sharp. She was used to being approached by scavengers looking to take advantage of her perceived weakness. The man raised his hands in a gesture of peace. "Just looking for someone who can fix this," he said, pulling a damaged energy blade from his belt. The weapon's hilt was scorched, and the emitter was cracked. Lyra studied him for a moment before nodding toward the workbench beside her. "Put it there." The man obeyed, setting the weapon down carefully. As Lyra examined the blade, Spanner skittered up onto the table, its small arms reaching out to assist. The man watched the drone with curiosity. "Impressive little machine," he remarked. "Spanner's better company than most people around here," Lyra replied without looking up. Her fingers worked quickly, dismantling the blade's damaged components with practiced ease. The man chuckled. "Can't argue with that. Name's Yarrick, by the way." "Lyra," she said curtly, "this'll take a while. You can wait inside if you want." Yarrick glanced at her small habitat, then back at her. "Thanks, but I'll stay out here. Don't want to crowd you." Lyra shrugged and continued her work. They sat in companionable silence, broken only by the occasional hum of her tools. Yarrick seemed content to watch her work, his demeanor surprisingly relaxed for a man who looked like he'd seen his share of fights. When she finished, she handed him the repaired blade. "Should work now," she said, "but don't push it too hard. The emitter's old, and replacement parts are hard to come by. Yarrick activated the blade, its energy crackling to life in a brilliant blue glow. He gave it an experimental swing, nodding in satisfaction. "You're good at this," he said. "How much do I owe you?" Lyra hesitated. She rarely received gratitude, let alone payment, for her work. "Whatever you think it's worth," she said finally. Yarrick pulled a handful of credits from his pouch and handed them to her. "Fair deal," he said. "Thanks, Lyra." She watched him go, the credits clutched in her hand. She had expected him to leave without another word, like most of the people who came to her for repairs. But before he disappeared into the haze of the colony, he turned back. "If you ever need help, Lyra, just call. I owe you one." The accident. Life continued as usual for Lyra in the days that followed. She repaired more broken equipment, scavenged for supplies, and avoided the other settlers as much as possible. But the quiet routine was shattered one evening when she heard shouting outside her habitat. She rolled her chair to the window and peered out. A group of settlers had gathered near the edge of the colony, their voices raised in anger. Lyra's heart sank when she saw the source of the commotion. A crashed transport ship, its hull scorched and smoking. The ship had landed awkwardly, its nose buried in the ground, and its landing gear twisted like broken limbs. A plume of black smoke rose from its engines, and sparks flew from exposed wiring. The settlers were already arguing over who would claim the wreckage and its potentially valuable cargo. Lyra knew better than to get involved, but she couldn't ignore the faint sound of movement coming from inside the ship. Someone was still alive in there. Grabbing her tools and signaling Spanner to follow, she rolled out toward the crash site. The settlers ignored her, too preoccupied with their bickering to notice the outcast in her makeshift chair. As she approached the wreckage, she called out, "Is anyone in there?" A weak voice answered from within. "Help, please." Lyra didn't hesitate. She maneuvered her chair to the ship's hatch and used her tools to pry it open. Inside, she found a young human woman pinned beneath a collapsed support beam. Blood trickled from a gash on her forehead, and her breathing was labored. "Hold on," Lyra said, her voice firm. "I'll get you out." Spanner skittered forward, using its small arms to lift part of the beam while Lyra worked to stabilize it with her tools. It was slow, painstaking work, but together they managed to free the woman and drag her out of the wreckage. The settlers, finally noticing the commotion, began to gather around. Their expressions were a mix of curiosity and disdain. "Leave her," one of them said. "She won't survive long anyway." Lyra glared at him. "Then I'll take care of her." The man sneered. "Why bother? You can't even take care of yourself?" Before Lyra could respond, a familiar voice cut through the crowd. "Back off." Yarrick stepped forward, his hand resting on the hilt of his energy blade. His presence was enough to make the settlers scatter, their muttered protests fading as they returned to their habitats. Lyra looked up at him, surprised. "What are you doing here?" "Keeping my promise," Yarrick said, his gaze softening as he looked at the injured woman. "Let's get her inside." A bond forged. Together, they carried the woman back to Lyra's habitat. Yarrick worked alongside Lyra to treat her injuries, their movements synchronized as if they had done this 100 times before. The woman, whose name was Mira, drifted in and out of consciousness, her gratitude evident even in her weakened state. As the night wore on, Yarrick and Lyra sat together in the dim light of the habitat, their conversation flowing easily for the first time. Lyra found herself opening up to him in a way she hadn't with anyone else, sharing stories of her past and the pain of her abandonment. "You're stronger than you think," Yarrick said quietly. "You've survived all this, and you're still here. That's more than most people can say." Lyra looked at him, her heart swelling with a mixture of gratitude and something she couldn't quite name. For the first time in years, she felt like she wasn't alone. Chapter 2. Trust in the Shadows. Lyra awoke to the sound of soft, rhythmic beeping. Her eyes fluttered open, and she saw Spanner perched on the edge of the cot where the injured woman, Mira, lay. The drone monitored her vitals, its glowing lights casting faint patterns on the wall. Myra's breathing was steadier now, and the color had returned to her cheeks, though her bandaged wounds were a stark reminder of the harrowing crash. Lyra stretched, her muscles aching from the previous night's exertion. She wheeled herself to the workbench where Yarrick sat, disassembling his energy blade. He glanced at her, offering a faint smile. "Morning," he said. "You were out cold for a while." "I don't usually get visitors," she replied, brushing her hair out of her face. "Let alone two in one day." Yarrick chuckled softly, but his expression turned serious. "How's she doing?" "Stable," Lyra said, nodding toward Mira. "But she's lucky we found her. Another hour in that wreck, and she wouldn't have made it." Yarrick set down the blades emitter. "You've got a knack for fixing things, people, machines. Doesn't seem to matter." Lyra shrugged, brushing off the compliment. "What about you? Why'd you stay to help?" Yarrick leaned back in his chair, his gaze thoughtful. "Let's just say I've seen enough people left behind in my life. Didn't feel right walking away." A strained colony. As the day wore on, Mira regained consciousness, her eyes fluttering open to take in her surroundings. Lyra introduced herself and explained what had happened, while Yarrick stood nearby, keeping an eye on the doorway. "Thank you," Mira murmured, her voice hoarse. I thought I was done for." "You're safe here," Lyra assured her. "For now." Mira tried to sit up, wincing as pain shot through her side. "I was transporting cargo for a company. Had a mechanical failure. Then, something hit us." "Something hit you?" Yarrick asked, stepping closer. "Like what?" Mira frowned, struggling to recall. "A ship, I think. Pirates, maybe. They came out of nowhere, disabled my engines, then left when the ship went down." Jarek's expression darkened. "Pirates don't usually leave survivors. They were probably scouting the area, and they'll be back." Lyra's stomach tightened. The colony was already hostile enough without the threat of off-world raiders. If pirates came looking for Myra's cargo, everyone on Varys 7 would be in danger. "We need to move her," Yarrick said. "Your place is too exposed." Lyra frowned, her hands gripping the wheels of her chair. "And go where?" "The settlers don't exactly welcome strays, let alone one of us." "I'll handle them," Yarrick said firmly. "But first, we need to know what we're dealing with." "Mira, what were you transporting?" Mira hesitated, her eyes flicking between them. "Medical supplies," she admitted. "High-grade stims, Regan packs, things like that. It's worth a fortune on black markets." Lyra sighed. "Figures. That cargo's a death sentence." "Not if we're smart," Yarrick said. "We hide her and the supplies. Let the pirates think it's gone. They won't waste time searching if they think there's nothing here." A dangerous alliance. As night fell, Yarrick left to scout the settlement and assess the situation. Lyra stayed behind with Mira, working late into the night to repair an old hover sled she had salvaged. The sled would allow them to transport Mira and the supplies to a safer location, but it was barely functional. "You're risking a lot for me," Mira said quietly, watching Lyra work. "Not just for you," Lyra replied without looking up. "If those pirates come here, they won't stop at you. They'll burn this colony to the ground." Mira fell silent, her guilt evident. After a moment, she said, "Thank you for not giving up on me." Lyra paused, her hands resting on the sled's control panel. "I know what it's like to be left behind." The first confrontation. Yarrick returned just before dawn, his expression grim. "Settlers are talking. They know about the crash, and some of them are planning to sell the info to the pirates." "Of course they are," Lyra muttered. "They'd sell their own mothers if the price was right." Yarrick nodded toward the sled. "Is that thing ready?" "Barely," Lyra said. "But it'll do." They loaded Mira onto the sled, along with a few crates of supplies salvaged from the wreck. Yarrick took the lead, his rifle slung across his back, while Spanner skittered alongside them, scanning the area for threats. The journey was slow and tense, the sled's hover engines whining as it navigated the uneven terrain. Lyra's chair struggled over the rocky ground, but she refused Jarek's offer to push her. They had just reached the outskirts of the colony when Spanner emitted a sharp warning beep. Yarrick raised his hand, signaling them to stop. "What is it?" Lyra whispered. "Trouble," Yarrick said, his eyes scanning the shadows. "Stay here." Before Lyra could protest, Yarrick disappeared into the darkness. Moments later, the sound of raised voices reached her ears. "Where do you think you're going, Merc?" a gruff voice demanded. "None of your business," Yarrick replied calmly. "It is when you're sneaking off with supplies that belong to the colony." Lyra's heart sank. She recognized the voice. Krant, one of the colony's self-appointed enforcers. Kront and his gang were little more than thugs, but they had enough muscle to cause real trouble. "You've got two choices," Kront continued. "Hand over the cargo, or we take it and you." Jarek's voice was ice-cold. "You can try." The ensuing fight was brutal but brief. Jarek moved like a predator, taking out two of Kront's men before they realized what was happening. The remaining thugs fled into the night, leaving Kront clutching a broken arm and cursing. Jarek returned to Lyra and Mira, his rifle still smoking. "We need to move. Now." A fragile refuge. By dawn, they had reached an abandoned mining outpost deep in the canyonlands. The facility was a maze of crumbling structures and rusting machinery, but it offered shelter and cover. Lyra and Jarek worked quickly to secure the area, setting up makeshift defenses while Mira rested. As they finished, Jarek sat beside Lyra, the weight of the night's events evident in his posture. "You don't owe me an explanation," he said, "but why do you stay here? On this moon, in this hellhole?" Lyra hesitated, her fingers tracing the worn surface of her chair. "Because it's all I've got," she admitted. "I was abandoned here, and for a long time, I thought I deserved it. That being weak meant I was worthless." Jarek frowned. "You're not weak, Lyra. You've survived more than most people ever could." "Surviving isn't the same as living," she said quietly. Jarek placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch steady and reassuring. "Then let's change that. Together." Lyra looked at him, her eyes searching his face. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe that she didn't have to face the darkness alone. Chapter 3. A storm approaches. The abandoned mining outpost was eerily quiet. The jagged canyon wall surrounding it provided a natural barrier, but the silence only heightened the tension. Nathan and Lyra worked tirelessly to fortify their refuge, using whatever scraps of metal and abandoned machinery they could salvage. Mira, still weak from her injuries, helped where she could, but her strength waned quickly. By the time night fell, the outpost had been transformed into a makeshift fortress. Automated turrets, hastily repaired and reprogrammed by Lyra, now lined the perimeter. Jarek had scouted a series of escape routes, but even he admitted their chances of survival were slim if the pirates found them. And the pirates were coming. It was only a matter of time. The calm before the storm. Lyra sat at her workbench, her hands busy repairing Spanner's damaged servos. The little drone chirped softly, its glowing eyes watching her intently. She could feel Jarek's presence behind her, his steady breathing a quiet reassurance. "You've done more than anyone could ask," Jarek said after a long silence. "You've already saved Mira. You don't have to stay and fight." Lyra didn't look up from her work. "And leave you to face them alone? Not a chance." "You're not a soldier, Lyra," Jarek said gently. "You've done enough." Her hands stilled, and she turned to face him. "I might not be a soldier, but I'm not helpless either. I'm tired of running, Jarek. Tired of hiding. If this is where I make my stand, so be it." Jarek nodded, respect flickering in his eyes. "Fair enough. Just know I've got your back." Lyra gave him a faint smile, then returned to her work. Despite the looming threat, she felt a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. For the first time since her accident, she wasn't just surviving, she was fighting for something greater than herself. The first wave. The attack came just before dawn. The motion sensors pinged softly, their red lights blinking in unison. Lyra, Jarek, and Mira rushed to their positions, their breaths shallow as they listened to the approaching hum of engines. "They're here," Jarek said, his rifle at the ready. "Remember the plan. We hold them at the perimeter as long as we can." Lyra nodded, her pulse quickening. Spanner scuttled to her side, its small arms ready to assist. Mira, though still weak, held a blaster with trembling hands. The first pirate ship appeared over the ridge, its sleek black hull gleaming in the faint light. It hovered for a moment, then unleashed a barrage of plasma bolts that slammed into the canyon walls. Dust and debris rained down, but the outpost's defenses held. Lyra activated the automated turrets, which roared to life, their beams of energy cutting through the dawn. One of the pirate ships took a direct hit, spiraling out of control before crashing into the canyon floor. The pirates on foot scattered, their shouts echoing through the narrow pass. "They're trying to flank us," Jarek shouted, firing at a group of pirates attempting to sneak through a gap in the defenses. Lyra adjusted the turrets, her fingers flying over the control panel. "I've got them. Keep them busy." The turrets turned, their targeting systems locking onto the flanking pirates. A volley of energy blasts forced the attackers to retreat, but more were coming. The pirates had numbers on their side, and they weren't giving up easily. A desperate defense. As the battle raged on, the outpost's defenses began to falter. One of the turrets overheated and exploded, leaving a section of the perimeter vulnerable. Yarrick moved to cover the gap, his rifle blazing as he held the line. "Lyra, I need you to fix that turret," he called over his shoulder. "I'm on it," she replied, wheeling herself to the damaged unit. Spanner followed, its small body darting through the chaos as it helped her repair the turret's wiring. Mira, still inside the main structure, fired sporadically at any pirate who got too close. Though she was clearly terrified, her determination was evident. "Stay down, Mira," Yarrick shouted as a plasma bolt narrowly missed her. Lyra worked frantically, her hands steady despite the chaos. She rerouted power to the damaged turret and activated it just as a group of pirates breached the perimeter. The turret fired a continuous beam of energy, cutting through the attackers and forcing the others to retreat. "I've got it," Lyra shouted, her voice triumphant. Yarrick grinned, his rifle smoking as he took down another pirate. "You're a damn miracle worker, Lyra." But their victory was short-lived. Another pirate ship appeared, this one larger and more heavily armed. Its cannons fired relentlessly, blasting through the canyon walls and shaking the ground beneath them. "We can't hold them off forever," Mira shouted, her voice tinged with panic. Yarrick cursed under his breath. "They've brought reinforcements. We need to fall back." "No," Lyra said firmly. "We hold this position. I have an idea." Lyra's gambit. Lyra wheeled herself to the central control panel, her mind racing. She had noticed something during the Fight A pattern in the pirates' movements. They were funneling their forces through the narrowest part of the canyon, likely unaware of the outpost's full layout. "If I can collapse the ridge," she said, her voice steady, "we can trap them here. They'll have no choice but to retreat." Jarrek's eyes widened. "That's insane. You'd bury yourself with them." "Not if I time it right," Lyra replied. "I just need a few minutes." Yarrick hesitated, then nodded. "Do it. I'll cover you." Lyra activated the outpost's seismic charges, a feature she had discovered while repairing the defenses. The charges were old and unstable, but they would be enough to bring the ridge down. As she worked, Yarrick and Mira fought to keep the pirates at bay. Spanner scuttled around, its small arms repairing damaged turrets and relaying tactical data to Lyra. "Almost there," Lyra muttered, her fingers flying over the controls. "Just a little more." A plasma bolt struck the panel next to her, sending sparks flying. She flinched but kept working, her determination unwavering. "Lyra, hurry," Yarrick shouted as the pirates pressed closer. "Done," she shouted, slamming her hand down on the activation switch. The charges detonated with a deafening roar, the ground shaking violently as the ridge began to collapse. Rocks and debris rained down, cutting off the pirates' advance and forcing their ships to retreat. The remaining pirates scattered, their morale shattered. A hard-won victory. When the dust settled, the outpost was eerily quiet. Lyra, Yarrick, and Mira emerged from their positions, their faces streaked with dirt and exhaustion. The canyon was littered with debris, but the pirates were gone. "You did it," Yarrick said, his voice filled with admiration. "You saved us." Lyra gave him a tired smile. "We saved each other." Mira stepped forward, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you, both of you. I don't know how I'll ever repay you." "You don't have to," Lyra said. "Just stay alive." A new beginning. In the days that followed, the three of them worked to rebuild the outpost. The bond they had forged in battle grew stronger, and for the first time in years, Lyra felt like she belonged. "You're not alone anymore," Yarrick said one evening as they sat around a small fire. "We're a team. A family." Lyra looked at him, her heart swelling with emotion. For so long, she had believed she was broken, abandoned, and unworthy. But now, she saw herself through their eyes, strong, capable, and valued. And for the first time, she allowed herself to believe it. Chapter 4. rising from the ashes. The canyon was still, the aftermath of the battle, leaving a heavy silence over the ruins of the mining outpost. Lyra, Yarrick, and Mira sat together near the remains of a turret, their bodies battered and exhausted but alive. The ridge collapse had driven the pirates away, but the price of their survival was etched into the scorched earth around them. Lyra's hands trembled as she tightened the last bolt on Spanner, who had taken significant damage during the fight. The little drone chirped weakly, its lights flickering as it booted back to life. Lyra let out a shaky breath, a rare smile crossing her face. "There you go, Spanner," she murmured. "Good as new." "Almost." Yarrick leaned against a pile of debris, his rifle resting across his lap. His armor was scorched, and his face bore fresh cuts, but his eyes were sharp as ever. "You saved all of us, Lyra. You didn't just hold the line, you turned the tide." Lyra looked away, her expression guarded. "We barely made it. If they come back?" "They won't," Yarrick interrupted firmly. "Not after the message we sent. Pirates don't waste resources on losing battles." Mira, still pale from her injuries, nodded in agreement. "You gave us hope, Lyra. Something this colony hasn't had in a long time." Lyra remained silent, the weight of their words pressing on her. She had spent years believing she was broken, abandoned by her people and left to survive on scraps. Now, for the first time, she felt a spark of something new, a sense of purpose. A new threat. Just as they began to discuss plans to rebuild the outpost, Spanner emitted a sharp, frantic beep. Lyra's heart sank as she glanced at the drone's display. A ship was approaching, fast and low, its trajectory heading straight for them. Yarrick was on his feet instantly, his rifle raised. "Pirates?" Lyra studied the readings. "No, it's not the same signature. This ship's Terran." Before they could react, the sleek vessel landed in the canyon, its engines kicking up a cloud of dust. The ramp lowered, revealing a figure clad in military-grade armor. The man's imposing stance and sharp gaze immediately put them on edge. "I am Commander Varek of the Terran Authority," the man announced, his voice cold and authoritative. "We received reports of illegal activity in this sector." Yarrick stepped forward, his rifle lowered but ready. "We were defending ourselves. Pirates attacked us." Varek's gaze swept over the battered outpost, landing briefly on Lyra. "You disabled a significant number of hostile forces and collapsed part of the canyon. Impressive, but problematic. This area falls under Terran jurisdiction, and unauthorized settlements are prohibited." Lyra's stomach twisted. They had survived the pirates, only to face eviction or worse. "This colony is all we have," she said, her voice steady despite her fear. "We fought to protect it. If you take it away, where will we go?" Varek studied her, his expression unreadable. "Your efforts are commendable, but regulations are regulations. However," he paused, his gaze softening slightly. "I have some discretion in these matters. Perhaps an agreement can be reached." Yarrick narrowed his eyes. "What kind of agreement?" "The Terran Authority has a vested interest in stabilizing this region," Varek explained. "If you and your people are willing to assist in clearing out remaining pirate activity, we can offer support supplies, defenses, and legal recognition for your colony." Lyra exchanged a glance with Yarrick and Mira. It wasn't ideal, but it was better than being displaced. "Deal," Yarrick said, extending a hand. Varek shook it, his grip firm. "Good. We'll send a team to assist you in the coming days. Be ready." As the commander returned to his ship, Lyra let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The promise of support gave her hope, but the thought of more battles ahead filled her with dread. Rebuilding together. Over the next few weeks, the outpost began to transform. With supplies and technical support from the Terran Authority, the settlers worked tirelessly to repair the damage and strengthen their defenses. What had once been a crumbling refuge became a thriving hub, its walls reinforced and its people united. Lyra found herself at the center of the efforts, her skills as a mechanic and strategist earning her newfound respect among the settlers. Even those who had once scorned her now looked to her for guidance. "You've come a long way," Yarrick said one evening as they stood on the outpost's new watchtower, watching the sunset paint the canyon in hues of gold and crimson. "So have you," Lyra replied, a hint of a smile on her lips. Yarrick chuckled. "Fair enough. But seriously, Lyra UVE shown everyone here that strength isn't just about standing tall. It's about standing firm, no matter what. Lyra's smile widened, and for the first time, she felt the truth in his words. She had found her place not as a warrior, but as a protector, a builder, and a leader. A new family. As the colony flourished, so did the bonds between Lyra, Yarrick, and Mira. They became an inseparable team, each bringing their strengths to the table. Mira, fully recovered, began training others in combat tactics, while Yarrick led scouting missions to root out remaining pirate threats. Lyra, meanwhile, continued to innovate, designing new defenses and upgrading the colony's infrastructure. Spanner, ever faithful, was her constant companion, its cheerful chirps a reminder of the life she had rebuilt from scraps. One evening, as they gathered around a fire, Mira spoke up. "I never thought I'd find a home here, but thanks to you too, I did." Yarrick raised his cup in a toast. "To family, the one we choose." Lyra hesitated for a moment, then lifted her own cup. "To family." As they laughed and shared stories under the stars, Lyra felt a warmth she hadn't known in years. She had been abandoned, cast aside as broken, but here, among these people, she had found a new beginning. A bright future. In the weeks and months that followed, the colony grew stronger, its people banding together to face whatever challenges came their way. The Terran Authority kept their word, providing the settlers with the resources they needed to thrive. And at the heart of it all was Lyra, a woman who had once believed she was worthless. Now, she was a symbol of resilience and hope, a reminder that even in the darkest of places, light could be found. As the sun rose over the canyon, casting its golden light over the rebuilt outpost, Lyra stood at the watchtower with Yarrick and Mira by her side. Together, they faced the future, ready for whatever came next.